Important environmental terms and issues. Let us see what are the definitions, issues, and terms relating to the environment. Ecology. Ecology is the study of the relationship of plants and animals to their physical and biological environment. The physical environment includes light and heat or solar radiation, moisture, wind, oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients in soil, water, and atmosphere. The biological environment includes organisms of the same kind as well as other plants and animals. Ecology is the scientific study of the distribution and abundance of living organisms and how the distribution and abundance are affected by interactions between the organisms and their environment. Environmental studies. The word environment is most commonly used describing natural environment and means the sum of all living and non-living things that surround an organism or a group of organisms. Environment includes all elements, factors, and conditions that have some impact on growth and development of a certain organism. Environment includes both biotic and abiotic factors that have an influence on the observed organism. Abiotic factors such as light, temperature, water, atmospheric gases combine with the biotic factors, that is all the surrounding living species. The environment often changes after some time and therefore many organisms have the ability to adapt to these changes. However, tolerance range is not the same with all species and exposure to environmental conditions at the limit of a certain organism's tolerance range represents environmental stress. Broadly, environmental studies is the systematic study of the human interaction with their environment. It is a broad field of study that includes the natural environment, built environments, social environments, organizational environments, and the sets of relationships between them. Environmental studies is distinct from ecology and environmental science. The environment of an organism includes both physical properties, which can be described as the sum of local abiotic factors such as sunlight, climate, geology, and biotic factors. Environmentalism is a very important political and social movement with a goal to protect environment by emphasizing the importance of nature's role in protection of the environment in combination with various actions and policies oriented to its preservation. Environmentalism is a movement connected with the environmental scientists and many of their goals. Some of these goals include to reduce world consumption of fossil fuels, to reduce and clean up all sorts of pollution, that is air, sea, and river, with future goal of zero pollution. Emphasis on clean alternative energy sources that have low carbon emissions, sustainable use of water, land, and other scarce resources, preservation of existing endangered species, and lastly, protection of biodiversity. Biodiversity. Biodiversity or biological diversity is a term coined to describe the immense variety and richness of life on this planet. Biodiversity includes not only the many species that exist, but also the diversity of populations that make up a species, the genetic diversity among individual life forms, and the many different habitats and ecosystems around the globe. The use of the term biodiversity grew out of a concern that efforts were needed to conserve not just particularly charismatic animals, but the diversity of life around the world, including many plants and animals that will never grace a letterhead or be the focus of an international campaign. There are many ongoing efforts, local, national, and international, to balance the needs of the human populations with the protection of endangered and threatened species. Nature has varied forms of creation. They are plants and vegetation called as flora, animals, insects, birds, and microorganisms termed as fauna. If all these survive, living would be smooth for all the species on Earth. Thus, biodiversity would mean that there is a need for diverse biological varieties to coexist without the threat of extinction. Thus, biodiversity would simply mean varieties of species' right to existence. It would also mean that no one has the right to threaten a species' right to existence. Man, being the Homo sapien, should refrain from actions that would erode species but do everything to protect them from extinction. This will not only protect the environment but also enable smooth human survival as well. Thus, all species are equally important for the sustenance of all human and subhuman species. Hence, there is an urgent need to strengthen the food chain of all living creatures with sustainable and judicious use. In short, biodiversity can be defined as the richness in species of all living micro and macroorganisms occurring in a given habitat. The word was coined in 1985 and during the 1990s has become very widely used in the scientific circles. According to the World Resources Institute, biodiversity is the variety of the world's organisms, including their genetic diversity and the assemblage they form. It is the blanket term for natural biological wealth that determines human life and well-being. The breadth of the concept reflects the interrelatedness of genes, species, and ecosystems because genes are the components of species and species are the components of ecosystems. Therefore, altering the makeup of any level of this hierarchy can change the other species. How do ecologists measure biodiversity? Given the ongoing biodiversity loss that seems to be happening everywhere around the globe, it's really no wonder that ecologists try to measure biodiversity as the hope that this may lead to more success in conservation and help many species from going extinct. Measuring biodiversity focuses on three main factors: the number of species in a given area, that is, the richness of the species; the relation between the species in an area, that is, how close is the relation between one species to another; and lastly, different variations in biological and ecological characteristics across an area, or the so-called trait diversity. This mostly refers to ecosystem resilience against disturbance from non-native elements. Why is it important to measure biodiversity in as much area as possible? The answer is quite simple. Measuring biodiversity gives researchers the knowledge so that they can prioritize the areas that need the most protection, so that these areas could be turned into national parks, reserves, or some other form of protected area. However, it is very difficult to quantify these three factors and decide which areas need protection the most. The current practice was all about protecting areas with the largest number of threatened species, but things aren't that easy. There are also several major environmental issues that need to be put into the biodiversity equation, such as climate change, pollution, deforestation, and ocean acidification. This makes measuring biodiversity extremely complex and often leads to inadequate conservation efforts. From the current point of view, it is very difficult to recognize the methods that could lead to successful protection of threatened species. The interaction between so many different factors often leads to guesses and estimates, even despite the advanced scientific approach. Science, however, still remains our only weapon against the biodiversity loss. New studies will hopefully help conservationists to better protect threatened species across the globe. Marine biodiversity. Life on our planet originated in the oceans. These gigantic bodies of water cover 95% of the habitable space on Earth and provides a home for the vast diversity of life from the smallest bacteria to the gigantic blue whales. The health of the oceans must improve if we are to save the rich biodiversity in our oceans. This means protecting our oceans and seas from environmental threats such as climate change, pollution, overfishing, and ocean acidification. The scientists estimate that after excluding microscopic bacteria, there are up to a total number of 2.2 million living marine species. There needs to be a better funding for marine research because only science can save the life in our oceans from this variety of different environmental issues. There needs to be the adequate long-term support for marine biodiversity research because science does not only have to discover the changes brought by these issues but must also find the way on how can marine life adapt to these changes. The scientists from all over the world need to work together because only global approach can save the biodiversity of life in our oceans. The global politics will also have to change its course and put more emphasis on environmental issues. If only science and politics could see eye to eye. Fish are among the most threatened species on our planet. Many environmentalists say that biodiversity loss is an even bigger issue than climate change. The challenge of preserving the world's biodiversity is perhaps even greater than tackling and adapting to climate change. Marine protected areas are one of the best solutions to protect biodiversity in our oceans and seas. These areas can give marine life a chance to thrive without the constant interference from humans. Every marine species counts. From the smallest to the biggest, each and every one of them plays an important part in the marine food web. The entire life on our planet is interconnected and oceans are no exception. Fish and various marine species are among the most threatened species on our planet, with one of the main reasons for this situation being an overexploitation of fishing fleets. The decline of our planet's marine biodiversity reduces the productivity and sustainability of ecosystems, causing economic loss to the tune of billions of dollars.